Well, welcome back to our study together of the topic of unshakable faith. Um, I hope this study is an encouragement to you. We only have two or three lessons left in our series together, but looking back to last week, the name of that lesson was Faith All Stars. And we looked at the lives of four men from the book of Judges, Old Testament heroes, but all of them had some pretty major flaws, some pretty major, sin issues in their life, some really dumb mistakes, dumb things they did. And so you wonder, if you're going to put together a hall of fame of faith, couldn't you find somebody better than these guys? Because, idol worship and womanizing and, the whole schmeal, human sacrifice, throw that one in there. Well, the idea that the writer of Hebrews seemed to be trying to convey to us is that our faith is kind of a trump card. It's not that it excuses sin, but God can do great things with people who are willing to step out on faith. At one point, you may remember in the Gospels, Jesus' disciples said to him, "Increase our faith." He said, "Well, you really don't need much more faith. If you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, just a little bit, you can move mountains." It doesn't take a whole lot of faith if you just use what you've got. So that's something for you to think about. I think that the lives of these real three-dimensional people from the Old Testament who had their own strengths and weaknesses, it is a source of encouragement, but it's also good to find people in the 21st century that are walking around breathing today. And so I'd like to take a few minutes to visit with one of our elders in the Oxford Church of Christ, Pete Brummett, who's had quite a life in his attempt to follow the Lord. And I just want you to visit with him and get to know him a little bit. So we'll do that now. I think we're good to go. I just want to welcome to our class Pete Brummett, who's one of our shepherds, one of our elders. Pete has had a long and very interesting life. He was with the U.S. Navy for a long time and kind of traveled the world, a little bit of adventure involved, but he grew up here in Lafayette County, and so closed the circle. He's back here with us now. Pete is very dedicated and involved in oversight of our campus ministry. He partners with Dale Davis in that, and so we appreciate him and his wife Kathy so much for the ministry they do among us. So I just wanted to ask you, Pete, to share some about faith. We're studying this theme of unshakable faith and how to build a kind of faith that will last through ups and downs of life. And I think you've experienced some ups and downs in your life. So I just wanted to launch in and kind of take us back on your spiritual journey and how you and the Lord walked together and how you actually became a Christian. If you could just tell us a little bit about that.
I would love to, and it's fabulous to be here. I'm great to be part of this period of time with y'all, and look forward we all be back in the classroom together again in person instead of over Zoom. But anyway, my walk with the Lord has started when I was 11 years old. That's when I was baptized. Up until that point in time, my mother was the mainstay of everything with me and my religious faith and my walk and all. If the church door was open, my mother was there. And if mother's there, and strict as she was, the kids were there.
Mm-hmm.
So we were there every time the church had something. If it was any type of assembly of any form or fashion, if it was a play or any type of special event, she was there and had us there. So that's where it started. And she ruled us with a stiff hand when it come to our faith. And of course, like that, you can't help but some of it rub off at least.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Now, Pete, just to give us a mental picture here, how many kids in your family when you're growing up?
I had 4 sisters.
Mm-hmm. And you're the only boy.
I'm the only boy, and I'm right in the middle. So I learned how to duck and run fast at an early age. Yeah.
Well, now let's just come up to the present day. If you made a new friend and they would say, Pete, you seem awfully involved in religion and your church, it takes up a lot of your time and your resources. What's the basic foundation for your faith? If you scrape away all the superstructure, what is it that makes you believe?
Well, the main thing, I have to go back to the shaky ground as I came through my walk.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those times where when you're in the military, you're kind of an outcast in a sort of a way from the church. You're always on the road or going somewhere and all. But my mother always, when I talked to her, like I said, everything's back to her. When she talked to me, one of her first things was, did you go to church last Sunday? Was you in church last Sunday? What did y'all do? What did you study? What did the preacher talk about? You know, that kind of stuff. So as far as believing, I've been around the world a couple times. And during that time, I've seen some pretty terrible things. And I won't expound on that too much, but I spent I saw a lot of stuff in Ethiopia and Somalia, dealing with starvation, hunger, rulers that were very terrible with their people. It wasn't nothing to kill, just as it went. And I saw all of that, and at that time I questioned, where on earth is the Lord in all this? And that's what made it strong with me, I guess. And it's hard to explain why, but when you see all of that and you see how good you have it, and it's just, I wish I could explain it better, but it's very hard when you see that kind of stuff happening around the world. And then you turn around and say, gosh, the Lord has got to be involved somehow in this. And I know I'm not making much sense there, but that is one of the things. Then in 1998, I guess when I got out of the Navy in 92, I went to church, I would guess weekly, once a week maybe. I wasn't that faithful a follower when I first come out of the Navy, but my wife was at that time. And she ruled a strip farm, kind of like my mother, and forced me to go a lot of times where I thought I had other things I need to be doing, but that wasn't the case. But she, in 1998, are you still there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Can you hear me? I can hear you fine.
Yeah, but I don't see myself anymore. You see me?
Yes, sir. I can see you just as clear as a bell.
Okay, I don't know what happened, but I can't see myself, but I'll try. But anyway,
you're coming across just fine here, Pete, and I think the recording is fine. So just keep going, man. You're doing great.
Okay, in 1998, after coming home 6 years before that in a retired status from the Navy, we started actually it moved back to 1996. She started having a bout with some headaches. And those headaches led to brain tumors. Brain tumors led to her death in 1998. And that was another period of my life where it was very difficult to, say, man, where's the Lord in all this? We have spent all these years away from home. We finally got to come home and share our life with our daughters. I'd been away so much. And that happened, and I had a little struggle with that for a very short amount of time. And again, there come Mother. And my mother's back and involved, and she got me back into church in 1998. And I dare say that I try to attend every time there's something to attend. Sometimes things lead me to where I can't, but I try to be there when the door's open. Stuff that made my faith strong in my belief in the walk with the Lord, I believe was all those hard times. And I know that probably doesn't make much sense to a lot of people, but those hard times makes you appreciate the good times. And then you turn and you take a look and see what the Lord has blessed us all with, and the creation of God and everything that He created for us. And it just, I don't know what more to say.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe you answered our next question, but I'd like to just hear you respond. The question is, describe the greatest trial of faith that you've ever experienced, a time when you were really tempted just to throw in the towel.
I believe it was back in the I think it was 80s. I don't know exactly when that was, late 70s or 80s. I was I saw Ethiopia as it was in Somalia. a situation I was in Special Forces. I was able to be in those countries doing various things, which we can't get into, but I was able to see, Doug, it's very difficult how you can walk or be traveling down a road and just see death in the road ditches of kids from babies up to 40, 50 years old, just everywhere, and nobody really caring. And you have to question then, say, where is the Lord in all this? And it was a very difficult time. I saw that in Somalia. Then again, with my death of my wife, was a time that I questioned, but I think the first two was the real ditto in my, or step back in my faith. I think it's hard to get through that, and thank goodness there was a young man from Water Valley, Mississippi. Matter of fact, his name is Travis York, was part of the group that I was with, and he was our faith master, I guess you could call him, because if everybody started to do something they shouldn't be, or thinking bad thoughts, whatever, he is always the first step up and say, hey, you guys got to really be thinking about what you're doing, and who created all this and who's in control. And I think I got to give him the hand there too for getting us all through those hard times. And but I think those two times was the two times that would more or less make me wonder and think that, hey, maybe this is a step back for me, and I regret to admit that, but I believe it was, yes.
Okay, so let's just talk about Travis just a little bit. So he was with you in the military. He's one of your colleagues there in the military, your buddies or whatever.
Yes, he was. Yes, he was. He was. I
He
never
wasn't
knew.
like a chaplain or somebody that's trained in religion. He was just a faithful Christian and just walked with you there and said, hey, this is what we got to do.
He's a faithful Christian and still is to this day. And he was just, as we called him, a shipmate.
Yeah.
He's my buddy, and we traveled back and forth to home when we came home on visits and such. He was the one that him and his wife that I traveled with. Yes, good friend.
Well, that I think speaks to maybe something that we can gain in weathering the storms of faith is helping each other out. So that's important. Well,
and Doug, I think that is a key to a lot of things. When you think you're getting a little weary, whatever, reach out to someone that you trust, and I think they can help you through those times that you have a little glitch in your faith walk or whatever. I think that is somebody can help you, whether it's in the church, somebody in the church, or a close friend that can do those things with you. I think it is very, very valuable.
Well, I appreciate that. If you were going to give any other advice to people to disciples whose life is going pretty good right now, how they can get in shape, how they can prepare themselves. I know in military, it's all about training, to train your body, train your mind, train your team to be able to perform when the time comes. So what can we do to train ourselves spiritually to withstand these huge trials, these things that assault our senses and sometimes hit us without warning?
I think the two biggest things that people could do to help themselves through just about anything is, I would say, sit down and read the Bible. Get it back in the book and sit down, study that. And if you can, study with somebody, where you can fire questions back and forth, and you could just, study things together. And also get down and pray. That's the key to it all, I think.
Well, Pete, I appreciate so much you being so open about your life and sharing some of your experiences. A little different than the average person, but we just appreciate you opening the door for us, and it really puts some meat on the bones as far as this study goes. So thank you so much, brother. God bless you and Kathy, and hope the Lord continue to take care of you.
God bless you and everybody listening. And if it's anything I can help or do or answer or visit with, whatever, I would love to do that.
Well, we look forward to seeing you in person very soon.
I hear you there. Thank you so much. Y'all take care and be safe.
Right. We'll see you later.
All right, bye.
I really appreciate Pete sharing with us from his life and being transparent and telling us some things that have been high points and low points for him. But let's turn ahead to today's lesson. And if you haven't done so already, you may want to look at the email that you received that has a copy of the handout. You can stop me now and go get your handout or a cup of coffee or whatever, Bible, and we'll continue our lesson. So if you've got that or if you've got a Bible, our text today is from Hebrews chapter 11, verses 35b, the second sentence there, through 39. So let me just read that to you. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes on the ground. You know, this subject of suffering is one that we really have a hard time getting much traction on. We've eliminated so much of the routine suffering in our lives that sometimes we view suffering as being something that should be completely foreign to the human experience. Somebody has said that most people across the globe recognize that suffering is normal in this fallen world, but Western culture, on the other hand, has so glorified the values of safety, comfort, and convenience that anything less is now regarded as something akin to a human rights violation. Now, I know this may shock some of you people under 40, but there was a time when air conditioning was not found in most homes. And most cars were not air conditioned, and people didn't have cell phones, and there were only 3 channels to watch on TV. So I'm sure that kind of suffering probably horrifies you. That people ate 3 times a day, they ate 3 meals a day, and they were really glad if they had 3 meals a day, and so forth and so on. So I'd like for us to think a little bit more, though, about this experience of suffering. And to do that, I'd like for us to tap into a historical source here in our community. So if you'll watch this, I'd like to just kind of do this to get our minds kind of geared to this idea of suffering being part of the human experience.
Well, here I am back on the Ole Miss campus. I'm in front of the contextualization marker or plaque that's just beside the Croft Institute, one of the 3 buildings that were originally part of the Ole Miss campus. Built before the Civil War and opened about 1848. Now, this particular plaque tells us about the role of African slaves in building and maintaining the university before the Civil War. And our topic this week is suffering faith. We think about suffering. A lot of the things that these African slaves endured, such as physical beatings or discomfort, emotional suffering such as being separated from their family, being sold, having no rights. These are some of the kinds of suffering that early Christians had to endure. Now, one big difference is that the slavery of these black people was involuntary. It was very, very difficult for them to escape. Early Christians, they could turn around and walk away from it any time they wanted to. And that's part of the context of this book of Hebrews, is trying to encourage these early Christians not to give up and not to walk away from it in spite of tremendous suffering. You may want to stop and read this plaque if you haven't already. It has some very important information on it. But as you do, think about the suffering of these people here about 150 years ago and suffering of our forefathers and mothers in the faith.
Well, as we look around the world, and not just back in history, but around the world today, we see that suffering comes in all different varieties, all different flavors, all different types. And in thinking about some of the different kinds of suffering and where suffering comes from, we realize that there's a big chunk of human suffering that comes from poor choices that we make. We sometimes are our own worst enemy. Or maybe it's poor choices, sinful things that other people do. Certainly persecution, and thank the Lord, persecution is not a big deal for Christians in this country. I think in the future, as our country grows more and more secular, we may find that it's a bigger deal for Christians. But in countries that are dominated by Islam or Hinduism, it can be hard on people to become Christians. And then there are things that are just like, part of being in a fallen and broken world. Tsunamis, earthquakes, birth defects. Uh, Paul talked about some of his suffering as a Christian missionary, as a Christian teacher in 2 Corinthians 11. He certainly mentioned a lot of suffering that he encountered, was persecution from people that were opposed to Christianity, but he also mentioned some things that were from natural disasters. He mentioned being shipwrecked several times, and he mentioned being in danger from rivers. So I guess those are floods, wouldn't you think? He talked about criminals. He talked about bandits. He talked about the emotional hardship he felt because of the pressure of my concern for all the churches, for other Christians. So, suffering can be physical. It can be emotional. There's maybe what's the difference, do you think, between hardship and suffering? Both those words are used and sometimes interchangeably in the Bible. Paul, in encouraging some young Christians in Acts 14, told them it's through many hardships, or some of the older translations, English translations, through many struggles, we must enter the kingdom. And so one of the key things the Bible teaches us about suffering, and I'm kind of laying a foundation for what we're going to say in Hebrews about suffering faith, is that suffering, like it or not, is normal. That there's going to be a certain amount of suffering that we as humans are going to encounter, but that it is an opportunity for our faith to grow and for our faith to be manifest to others. Paul wrote to Timothy and he said, join me in enduring hardship like a good soldier of Christ Jesus. If somebody says, well, if a young woman says, I'm going to volunteer for the Marines, I'm going to volunteer for the SEALs that Pete Brummett was a part of, a very elite group, and then they come home 2 weeks later and you say, what happened? They said, did you know that they expected us to get wet and muddy, that they expect us to get up in the middle of the night, and then they talked about us going places where people would actually shoot bullets at us? You say, well, sure, didn't you realize that's what you were volunteering for? As Christians, we need to realize that we volunteered to be soldiers, and sometimes we may be asked to suffer for the Lord. Jesus said this. He said, a servant is not greater than his master. You call me master. If they persecute me, if they crucify me, what do you think they're going to do to you? He said, a servant is not greater than his master. Paul said, everyone who desires to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted, sooner or later. So it's normal, it's to be expected, but it is an opportunity for Christian growth. And we read this in Romans chapter 5, what the good things that suffering can produce in our lives. Believe me, I've had a little bit of suffering. I don't like it. I'm not good at it. I don't want any more of it. But it can be a very healthy thing. In fact, getting on into Hebrews chapter 12, the Hebrew writer tries to encourage these Christians who have had some persecution and are likely to have more. And he says, endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. He says this is something that is part of your character development. And just as when you are a child and your parents set certain rules and have certain expectations and you're punished if you don't follow the rules, you have to learn to get up at a certain time and go to bed when they say it's time to go to bed, and do your homework and do your chores and that sort of thing. He says this is what some of the suffering that we encounter as Christians is all about. It's God training us and teaching us and preparing us, as it says in Romans 4, an eternal weight of glory. So it can have a really beneficial effects on us. Well, going back to today's lesson text, there's a really sharp break in the middle of verse 35. Going back to last week, the beginning of verse 35, Hebrews chapter 11 says, women receive back their dead, raised to life again. And then at the next sentence, he says, there were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. And then he goes on to list all the different kinds of suffering there. So we have a shifting of gears from great deeds done by faith to patient endurance that's again motivated by faith. Patient endurance. I don't know which is harder, defeating a pagan army, building an ark, doing all these great things that people did in the first part of the chapter, or now patient endurance. To realize that we're going to encounter some things in life that we can't work our way out of, we can't spend our way out of, we can't pray our way out of. We just have to endure it. We just have to take it. And, it's up to us whether that's going to make our faith stronger or cause us to throw it over our shoulder. Well, kind of an interesting catalog here of Bible characters and some of the things, or interesting list. It didn't give some people names, but I, on the second page of your sheet, the back of your sheet, however you choose to print it out there, have made a list of Bible characters, and I've asked you to match the person with the kind of suffering that they encountered. And I've given some hints from Scripture and some of the apocryphal literature there, so which you can look up online if you want to. But anyway, it's harder than you think it is to match these names with the suffering. But quite a catalog of kinds of suffering there, being sawed in two. You know who that was? Sawed in two. It's just horrific sort of stuff. But more your garden variety stuff here, just to being destitute and living in caves and holes, being mistreated, wandering the earth. And that wandering, it looks back to the first part of the chapter about the we call the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the people that lived in tents, that accepted that they were strangers and foreigners and exiles on earth, that this was a place they were passing through. This was not their home. And that indeed is a kind of hardship, if not suffering. Well, you say, okay, so I get it. It's normal. It's to be expected. We need to be tough. Our faith needs to persist through various kinds of hardship and suffering. But hey, Hebrews 11 is all about great deeds of faith. And this is kind of tacked on at the end. People that were experienced jeers and flogging, chains and imprisonment, killed with a sword. That kind of a downer. We have this victorious faith, victorious faith in the first part of the chapter. And now he's talking about all this, torture. I mean, grief. Why smoosh that in there? And I think one reason is, for the original readers, this is what they are about to experience. That the Hebrew writer is trying to get them ready. At the end of chapter 10, he talks about some of the kinds of persecution. He says, some of you have forfeited your possessions. Some of you have endured, imprisonment or beatings, or some of you have been partners. Your wife, your husband, your son, your daughter has lost their job or something because of their Christian faith. And so this is kind of what's beginning to happen, and he's trying to let them know they aren't the only ones, that this can be part of a faith walk with the Lord. Well, let me ask a question, and this is on your sheet. In our preaching, teaching, and conversations, and our here refers to Christians, to our congregation, if you will, do we tend to over or underemphasize the role of suffering in the Christian life? What do you think about that? On the one hand, I think that we often talk a better game than we play. We talk a lot about being persecuted for our belief, but are we ever really persecuted for our belief? Are we ever upfront enough about our faith where we could even encounter some ridicule or some social ostracism because of what we believe? Or are we as we say about cowboys, are we all hat and no cattle? So that's a danger. On the other hand, we can so emphasize the joy, the pleasure of our Christian life, the comfort, the air-conditioned building, the erudite preacher, the good food at the fellowship, the friendly hugs and handshakes, that when things get a little bit tough, when we can't meet together, when we don't enjoy, we don't get as much pleasure out of our Christian walk, then we decide to do something else with our money and our time. We become what's called a fair weather friend. They say a friend when you are in need is really a friend. A friend in need is a friend indeed. And we sing the song, I'll be a friend of Jesus. Okay, well, how many friends does he have when the going gets tough? That's a question that we have to answer. This topic of suffering, I got to tell you, is one that, I don't really get excited about. Because like I said, I've tried a little bit of it. I'm not very good at it, and I don't want any more of it. The whole book of 1 Peter, if we could edit a book out of the Bible, maybe we ought to edit 1 Peter, because everything is about suffering. And in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21, a very special verse, he says, "For Christ also suffered, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps." And Paul said, I want to know Christ and the fellowship of sharing in his sufferings. There's a great TV commercial that comes on when I'm trying to watch the news. These commercials they have on the news shows, they're all about medicine and things that old people need. It's really depressing. I get the impression nobody watches the news except old people like me that need medicine. Anyway, there's one for a new kind of medicine. Maybe you've seen it. And there's a rather, I got to say, healthy looking, attractive woman who must be, between 35 and 45. And she's got this 5-year-old daughter, cute girl. And they dress alike. And the little girl is always looking at her mother. And when her mother puts on her lipstick, she does her lips like women do when they go like that. And the little girl does this. She looks at her mother and she does that in the mirror too. So all of everything, she wants to be just like her mama. Well, that's kind of like you and me. And so when we encounter some suffering, whatever flavor or variety it is, whether it's due to natural disaster or a pandemic or out and out persecution, when our house burns down, our car wrecks, our business fails, our mate gets cancer, you name it. We're getting to be a little bit like this person that we're looking up to, because Christ also suffered, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. Pardon me if I'm making too much with that verse, or maybe twisting the context a little bit, but that's something that gives me great encouragement to think about that. So the idea that suffering is part of the curriculum of a faithful person is important. It's important for us to teach this to our new Christians. It's important for us to teach this to our teenagers. There's a great country music song, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. And we need to talk about that sometime. Jesus never promised us a rose garden. Along with the sunshine, there's going to be a little rain sometime. So we need to make this a part of our curriculum. It's not all going to be safety, comfort, and convenience. Now, we're almost done. I just want to make one further comment here, and this is kind of charging at a windmill. Okay, this is trying to sweep away the ocean. But if you could get in a time machine with me and we could go back 50 years, I think if you went to worship services back then, Christian worship services, the Lord's church, I think you would see a totally different set of expectations on the part of the audience. Back then, people went to worship and there was a heavy sense of duty. And the idea that we were going to worship, we were going to work, we were going to endure. Yeah, endure. Maybe a long, boring sermon, maybe a room that was too hot or too cold. And you have to be pretty old to remember those funeral home fans. If you know what a funeral home fan is, I'd like to tell you something. Not now. But anyway, funeral home fans, you know. And some of the singing was going to be off key. And boy, I can tell you as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, a lot of those songs were not my favorites, okay? But we would sing them, and I would sing along too, even though I didn't particularly like that song, you know. And some of the singing was not professional quality. I want you to know that, okay? And the whole idea is this is something that we are going to go through because, one, it shows our love for God, and two, it's going to make us better people. This is a rough analogy, okay, so it may break down entirely, but I didn't go to math class, even though I entered a major in math. I didn't go to math class because it was a lot of fun. I went to math class so I could learn math. It was something that I wanted to become. It wasn't because it was just so much fun and so pleasant. Now, there were some parts that, had some really great teachers, and they made some of it kind of fun or kind of interesting anyway, kind of something to get excited about. But by and large, it wasn't viewed as a recreation. Nowadays, when we go to worship, what's our attitude? Is it that this needs to be something that is fun, is stimulating, is entertaining? I want to hear the kind of music that I want to hear. I want a preacher to encourage me in a way that benefits my life and builds me up from all the stress and troubles and trials I've got. It's in fact all about meeting my needs. The room should be, the temperature should be just right. The people should be friendly, and the seat should be soft. I'm not saying it's wrong for us to try to be comfortable. And one flavor of suffering that the Bible really doesn't endorse at all is self-inflicted suffering. It's amazing the religions around the world that have signed up for this self-inflicted suffering. We see some of the Shiite Muslims in Iran beating themselves with chains. I don't know if this is really a thing or not, but we used to see pictures of holy men in India lying on beds of nails. And then in ancient Christianity, there were these hermits that would go off and live by themselves and just wear rough clothing and eat bread and water and, be completely isolated from other people. And the idea is that if I inflict enough suffering on myself, I think Martin Luther tried this for a while. If I inflict enough suffering on myself, I can purify myself. How's that for work salvation for you? Well, that is not endorsed. And the kind of suffering we read about here in Hebrews chapter 11 is not self-inflicted. The people, it says they were tortured and refused to be released. If you go back and read the book that he's referring to, I think, is the way they could have been released is to renounce their faith in God. Okay, it wasn't just keep torturing me, I want to die. It was no, if that's what it takes, I'm not going to renounce my faith in God. So I want to make it real clear that it's perfectly okay for us to be comfortable, but when the time comes for us to suffer for sake of our faith, or maybe when we sign up for more responsibility than we can comfortably handle, when we have to stay up a little later, when we have to give a little more money, when we have to work a little harder, we have to give up our free time or cut back on our work hours so we have time for the Lord's work, then this is the kind of hardship that I think the Lord expects and that he's very pleased with and will cause us to be more like Jesus. So I hope that's a little bit of encouragement to you. Next week, we're going to kind of wind up Hebrews 11, but we have a little bit further to go. So I hope you'll tune in then, and I hope this will be a great encouragement to you. Please pray for me this week. Thank you. Bye.